Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. And if you're new to my channel, hello. My name is Caitlin Elliott, and I cover true crime cases every single Tuesday. And if this is something that interests you, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button and turn on your notification bell so that you never miss a single upload that I will post. So, in today's video, we're actually going to be talking about a case that involves a child. And this is the case of 2-year-old Teekah Lewis. So like I mentioned before, Teekah Lewis was only 2 years old when she would mysteriously disappear from a bowling alley in Tacoma, Washington. And this happened back in 1999, back when technology wasn't exactly the best. So the little girl was last seen at a bowling alley in Tacoma, Washington, called the Frontier Lanes Bowling Alley. And this was when she went there alongside her mother, aunts, cousins, uncles, several family friends. There were so many people there that day. Everyone in the group was split up between the lanes of number 7 and 8 so that the group wasn't just crowded all in one spot. On this particular evening, back in January of 1999, it was said to be league night, and this meant that the entire bowling alley was jam-packed full of families who were there for the league night. Little Teekah became pretty bored relatively quickly. Remember, she's only 2 years old, so she can't really bowl. So she just, asked if she could play on some of these like little driving arcade games, if you know what I'm talking about. The little ones with the the wheels and everything. So her mother said yes, and she noticed her walking over towards the video games, and these video games were over by a side exit door. So she didn't think anything of it as she watched Teekah play. So she turned around for just a quick second, I think she said it was only 3 seconds, maybe 5, just to watch one of the uncles bowl. This interaction, like I said, only lasted a few moments, no longer than a minute, and when the mother named Teresa turned back to look over her shoulder at her daughter, she was gone. The police were called immediately afterwards when the family could not locate Teekah inside of the bowling alley. The family informed authorities of what the toddler had been doing before she vanished and what exactly she had been wearing. Teekah was last seen wearing a green and white Tweety Bird sweatshirt along with white pants and sneakers. The officers began to search around the wooded area that surrounded the bowling alley, thinking that maybe she may have wandered off and went into the woods. So this was after they established that she was not actually inside, and they searched the entire vicinity. So however, after several hours of searching outside, trying to make sure she didn't wander off alone somewhere in the very cold weather, there was no sign of the toddler. There were multiple volunteers who began searching the they started traveling to the surrounding malls and these grocery stores, and they started printing out flyers of Teekah and just a description of her and posting them around the town and hanging them up outside the walls, and just handing them out to people who were leaving the grocery stores and the malls so that they would see Teekah they would see the picture of Teekah, and if they did notice her, they would call the authorities right away. When word spread about her disappearance, no one could understand how the toddler could have vanished into thin air in just literally 20 seconds without anybody seeing her. The Tacoma Area Police Department then bring in a bloodhound, which this bloodhound was named Tunk, and Tunk was sent in so he could try to locate the little girl's scent. So Tunk was said to be one of the best search dogs in the entire tri-state area back in 1999, but unfortunately he could not pick up Teekah's scent outside anywhere. The search team continued to look throughout the entire bowling alley, looking through the bathrooms, looking through the actual lobby, just looking anywhere they possibly could to find the toddler. But unfortunately, no matter where they looked, she was not found. She was nowhere. Police believe that because Teekah was only 2 years old at the time, she could not have possibly gotten very far. The authorities then realized very quickly that 2-year-old Teekah was actually a victim of foul play, which meant that there was no way she could have wandered off and and at this point it meant that someone must have been involved with her disappearance. Despite this, her mother, Teresa, decided to continue handing out flyers about her daughter's disappearance, and she refused to give up hope. She believed that her baby girl was still alive out there and was kidnapped and then being raised as someone else's daughter. But the police had yet to find her or the family that she believes may have taken her, just anything that could lead to a resolution for the case. There was absolutely no clues or anything at the bowling alley or in the surrounding areas that could help authorities figure out where she could have gone. And this was so frustrating. But after 2 whole days, after the case had sat cold for 2 whole days, there was finally one tip of importance that was called in to the police, and this was the very first tip they did receive. An unrelated woman who still to this day remains anonymous called the local police and says that she believes that she may have connected the dots as to what could have happened to Teekah the night of her disappearance. So she began to inform authorities about a witness account that she had for the night that Teekah disappeared. On the same night, this woman was pulling into the bowling alley that Teekah and her family were at, and upon doing so, she happened to notice a dark-colored Pontiac Grand Am that was sitting in the parking lot, and just all of a sudden took off out of there at an extremely high rate of speed. The woman then calls the police about this information and reports it to authorities, and the authorities then began to look into this claim very seriously, trying to find out any information on the vehicle right away. The biggest situation that the authorities had at the time was video surveillance, because the bowling alley was said to not have any type of security measures done or any type of video surveillance outside. So it was kind of difficult to try and pinpoint if this was in fact a legit sighting, or where this vehicle could have been from, what this vehicle looked like, what the license plate looked like. So police felt like they had no other choice but to actually question the families and the people that had been there at the bowling alley the night of Teekah's disappearance for any type of substantial evidence. However, this became extremely difficult to do because of the sheer amount of people that had been packed inside the bowling alley that night. So authorities, they wanted to try and see if anyone had any home footage to see if they could find any type of evidence that Teekah had been captured on this home footage. But unfortunately, nothing really turned up that was of significance. Which, if you don't know what home video means, it's basically people back in like the 90s, early 2000s, even sometimes the 80s, would take this like video camcorder with them and kind of record everything, and it would somehow, after a lot of stuff getting completed and everything, that would then go on to get developed into a VHS tape. And it's kind of hard to explain because I wasn't really old enough to remember all of that. Remember, I was born in the late 90s, so it was very, I don't know, man. After Teekah's disappearance on January 23rd of 1999, her family and friends refused to give up hope of her being found. So she had last been seen playing at the wheel of a video arcade game by her mother named Teresa, who only turned her back for a few seconds before her daughter would eventually just disappear into thin air. Her entire family searched for her everywhere, but after no success, they did eventually end up notifying the security at the bowling alley, who ended up calling 911. The police began to search all over this particular area for Teekah, but unfortunately, they couldn't find her right away, so they began utilizing everything from bloodhounds to ATVs to even helicopters to get an aerial view. The authorities questioned numerous sex offenders that were in the area to see if they could be involved in Teekah's disappearance, but all of them ended up being ruled out very quickly as being involved. Authorities also checked a local landfill on the property to see if maybe possibly, something could have happened to her and she ended up in there, but nothing was found. So pretty soon, many detectives began to question if any of the family members had been involved, with Teekah's disappearance. When it comes to child abductions, a majority of the abductions are done so by a family member or a close friend of the family. But, however, upon investigation, it was then realized that the father had a verified alibi, and he was actually out of town the night that Teekah had disappeared, and this was verified by his co-workers and his friends. So the detectives then began to look into Teekah's mother, who had been at the bowling alley with her the night that she had disappeared. Teresa volunteers to take 2 polygraph tests, and it was revealed that she passed both of them with flying colors, which completely ruled her out as being involved as well. So once family was being ruled out as being involved, the authorities then started looking for the early 1990s Grand Am with tinted windows that was last seen speeding out of the bowling alley parking lot that night. The same vehicle that was seen speeding out of there was last said to have only been leaving that area within only a few seconds after Teekah had been, she had gone missing. They noticed that she had gone missing. So this became extremely suspicious to the authorities. Unfortunately, the bowling alley where Teekah did go missing from, over the years was torn down and then rebuilt into a fast food restaurant. But despite the bowling alley being closed, her mother Teresa travels there to this day to try and remember her little girl because it was the last place that she ever saw little Teekah. So on the night of Teekah's disappearance, there was no Amber Alert that was pushed out for her, despite the fact that the Amber Alert had actually been created 3 years prior. Once the bowling alley had discovered that 2-year-old little Teekah had vanished, they made an announcement on the loudspeaker to stop what everyone was doing and to just look for the little girl because they believed she could have gotten lost in the crowds. Everyone in the bowling alley, they complied and wasted absolutely no time searching for 2-year-old Teekah. Teresa had ran out the side door and she started calling for her daughter's name out into the night, hoping that Teekah could hear her if she managed to escape through the back door. She believed that her young daughter may have walked out the door on her own, and if she did so, she would hear her mother's voice and run back to her. However, upon testing this theory, Teresa realized that she could not have done this, little Teekah could not have done this, because she realized the door was way too heavy for a 2-year-old to push open on her own. Remember, like I said, she's 2 years old, she's probably 2 feet tall. There's no way that she was even tall enough to push open the handle. It was not a plausible theory anymore. So it's possible that this person, whoever he may have been, had known what he was doing the night that Teekah had disappeared and had left that night with her, and he managed to do so, without being caught, and he wanted to do this in a way that he knew he would be able to get away with her. Teresa told the police that Teekah was a little girl who loved her mother, and she would scream "Mama" on the top of her lungs if she was away from her mother and couldn't find her. She claimed that Teekah also would not just go to anyone if they called for her. She would only go to her mother, her aunts, her uncles, her sisters, and her babysitter. This left Teresa confused because who would Teekah be with if she was terrified of strangers? At this point, all Teresa really wanted was just for someone to come forward with the information that everyone was wanting to know and just tell everyone what happened to Teekah the day that she was abducted. As the investigation continues, the police found it hard to believe that nobody had seen anything the night that the little girl had disappeared. So there were so many people at the bowling alley. Remember, it was league night, so it was just jam-packed with so many families, and there was so many people there that it had been just impossible for someone to not see a little girl going missing. A lot of reporters believe that in order for the case to move forward and any suspects to be named in the case, the investigators needed to return back to the bowling alley to gather more information. It's possible that this person who actually took Teekah was a frequent visitor of the bar and had actually been to the bowling alley on multiple occasions, and he knew how to remain hidden while escaping. When it comes to this case, it's not difficult at all to abduct a child like this, unfortunately, because of how crowded the bowling alley was on league night. The detectives believed it was important to travel back to the bar to try and find out any information about local attendees of the bar who would arrive there every day, but unfortunately, due to privacy, the bar workers could not release this information to authorities, no matter how important it was to the case. Back then, the police then began to investigate into 4 possible scenarios as to what could have happened the day that Teekah had disappeared. But one theory that they had, okay, so there's one theory, and this was these were put into least to most likely to have happened. So the least likely scenario was that there may have been a party who had an argument, and one of the family members just took Teekah for revenge and then left with her. However, this theory is extremely rare. It's extremely rare to have a family member just abduct, like a child like that in front of everybody. And it's also unlikely because too much time had passed, and if a family member had taken Teekah, you would think that this person would have come forward, or at least, would have drawn suspicion to themselves. Like if Aunt Sue kidnapped Teekah and traveled to Buffalo, New York, I think it would raise some red flags if she moved to Buffalo, New York immediately after Teekah went missing, So, like I said, there was no way at this point that the family could have been involved because too much time had passed and everyone in the family had cooperated with authorities, and it was just, that didn't make any sense at this point. The second theory that they had was that little Teekah may have left the video game area and exited out the door into the freezing cold. This is a possible theory, but it had been proven that the door was far too heavy for a 2-year-old to push open by herself, so that could have been ruled out. But, however, if someone else was leaving the bowling alley and had pushed open the door, she could have slipped out the door at the same time they were leaving. But also, if this were the case, wouldn't the family notice that there was a small child, walking around with them that they did not have in their family? They don't know who this child is. The third theory, and the most likely one that authorities still have to this day, was that Teekah had been abducted. The person behind the crime could have been stalking and watching the toddler, waiting for the perfect opportunity to get her alone and snatch her. So, authorities believe that he may have possibly had lured her away with the promise of candy, gum, or even toys before snatching her. There was no way that 2-year-old Teekah, like I said, could have exited out that door, opened it up the heavy door, walked out into the freezing cold Tacoma, Washington weather in January while at a packed bowling alley and nobody saw anything. The worst part about the situation, like I've mentioned before, was that the bowling alley did not have any properly working security cameras that could have helped figure out where exactly the little girl could have gone. And this was extremely frustrating to not only the family, but to the authorities. So the likelihood that Teekah had wandered off began to seem extremely slim to the detectives, so they decided to look back into Teekah's relatives once again. Statistically, family abductions are much more common than stranger abductions, but however, in this scenario, there were a lot of witnesses that claimed to have seen Teekah at the bowling alley that night. the most likely scenario that the authorities were able to 100% stick with and come up with was that she had been abducted by a male sex offender who must have been at the bowling alley that night. The police and local volunteers started putting up flyers around the community discussing the case in hopes that anyone in the public could help bring forth clues that could help, locate Teekah Lewis. It was brought up that the abductor could have been a league member at the bowling alley that night, and that's why, they were there that night. Teekah's mother, Teresa, also recalled just how busy the bowling alley was the night that Teekah disappeared, and she believed that because it was so busy, that must have meant that it was a friendly environment. And this was perfect for her and for her family because she believed if she let her children go off on their own, someone could be watching them and making sure that they're okay because there were so many families there with young children themselves. It's more possible that the abductor was also not on any team and was just there to find a victim, if you know what I mean, and was able to find the opportunity to snatch little Teekah before anybody noticed anything. As time continues to go on without any new leads, the case ultimately grows cold. And when it comes to cold cases like this, that just continue to get colder and colder and colder over time, the more difficult it becomes to solve the case. In 2009, there was actually a new detective who was brought onto the case that was said to have fresh new eyes, never heard about this case before, didn't have any bias against anybody, didn't know the family. And so the new detectives began to dig deep into the case, and they uncover new information that had not been released to the public back in 1999 when Teekah first went missing. So, get this, because this is just wild to me. So, the night that Teekah went missing, there were also 3 similar incidents that happened the same night around the same location. I mean, yeah, the tea is getting spilled here. According to police, there was a young boy, a poor little boy, who claimed that, he was, molested by an unknown white male. It gets worse. So 3 days after Teekah was said to have gone missing, a 6-year-old boy who was in the same bowling alley arcade as Teekah had been in whenever she went missing was then approached by a white male with dark brown hair. So the mother of the little boy notices this and stops the man right away and notified the security, who then takes the man outside and tells him he had to go home. Unfortunately, the police were never called about this incident, which just blows my mind because, if there's this creepy guy there who comes over and tries to molest your child, and there's proof and evidence and all these people see it, why the hell was the police not notified, especially when this happened so close after Teekah went missing? It doesn't take a genius to put 2 and 2 together and start, connecting the dots here. I don't know. I really don't know. So, there was even a 3rd incident that occurred right nearby the bowling alley that Teekah went missing from, and that this incident happened to this poor little boy, where a father was at the park with his young daughter. The father noticed a white male with brown hair standing right beside the bathrooms, and every time a child would walk past this guy, trying to get into the bathrooms or whatever, he would try to motion them, hey, come with me, and he would attempt to lure the child to come over to him, which is just disgusting, which also leads to the child sex offender predator theory that they had, but so disgusting. So, the father of the little girl sees this, and he's like, oh, hell no, this is disgusting, this is not going to be happening at the park, there are kids here, there are families here, no. So he starts to go after this guy, and he begins to chase him. This dad is full-blown taken off to try and go after this guy, right? So the guy who was, also the same guy who was said to have been seen at the bowling alley, then hops into, get this, a blue 1995 Pontiac, the exact same vehicle that was at the bowling alley the night that Teekah had disappeared. It bolted out of the bowling alley parking lot, and it seemed like the guy knew what he was doing too, because he seemed to be doing a lot of things here, So as soon as he gets caught by the dad, he hops into his car and takes off like a bat out of hell out of that parking lot by the park. And he just goes. So in July of 2007, there was a man who was arrested and was suspected in the abduction of 12-year-old Zena Linick. I think that's how you pronounce her name, Zena Linick. When authorities caught the suspect and decided to search his home, they discovered several blood-stained pairs of little girl underwear. Like, that's just disturbing to think about on its own. They made the authorities believe that he had actually kidnapped these victims, and eventually they began to start to look into him as possibly being connected to the abduction of little Teekah. However, the authorities were not able to link the two cases, so unfortunately it was just then left, cold and just, there was no way they could have been linked together. He could not have been involved. So that scratched that theory, and then they were back to square one, trying to figure out who this guy was that was at the bowling alley that night, and possibly the same person who not only went to the bowling alley and took Teekah, but was trying to lure people into the bathrooms. Disgusting. So there was then a young Jane Doe who was discovered back in the year of 2001, which was 2 years after little Teekah went missing. So the doe, which was named Precious Doe, was actually revealed to be Erica Green, Erica Green back in 2005, and not Teekah Lewis through DNA. So at the time of the discovery, the police believed that this body had been Teekah, so they took off towards the location to try and see if they can identify the little girl as Teekah. But unfortunately, once they run the DNA test, it does not come back as Teekah, it comes back as little Erica. So time passes by again, and then there is another incident that occurs in Dallas, Texas, that brought up Teekah's abduction. There was a little girl who was seen there who looked exactly like Teekah, and it was said that she looked so similar to the little girl that her own mother became extremely convinced, 100% convinced, that this little girl was her daughter Teekah, and that she was abducted by this family to be raised as one of their own. So whenever they traveled down to look into the details surrounding this child, they ran DNA tests on her, and everybody was just devastated, including Teresa, who was just upset beyond belief to realize that this little girl was not in fact Teekah, but was in fact their daughter, the family's daughter. And this just destroyed the family even more. There was a man who was a little boy back in the bowling alley in 1999 who came forward to the authorities, and this was a couple years ago, and he said that he recalled seeing 2 men approaching Teekah that night, but the authorities could not determine if this was true or not because of the fact that there were no working security cameras to prove this claim actually happened, which, the fact that the security cameras were not working that night, if they were working that night, I feel like this case would have been solved immediately. I'm telling you. So, to this day, unfortunately, Teekah has never been found, and her mother has never ever given up hope that she will be found. Every year that has passed since the little girl's abduction, her mother then holds a candlelight vigil at the same bowling alley, which was now a fast food restaurant, where her little daughter was taken. And you know, like I said, this was torn down to become a fast food restaurant. And it's so hard to have to see a place where you went to with your little girl get torn down and remade into a fast food restaurant. Like, oh my God, that has to be so painful. So, to remember Teekah and just honor her memory and everything, during the holiday season each year, there is a toy drive that is in her memory. This is done to keep her name out there in the open so she wouldn't be forgotten and try to spread her spirit to others as her family refuses for her name to be forgotten. There's a lot of cases that go through time, and as time goes on, everyone seems to forget that it happened and they just don't talk about it as much anymore. And that's really hard for a lot of the families because it feels like their children and their loved ones are being forgotten and covered up by the media. So, like I said, authorities are still asking for anyone to come forward with any information in regards to Teekah's abduction and disappearance. So, they believe that there is just one person out there that knows something that can really just put this whole case to a close. And that one person has remained silent for, 22 years now. And it's just frustrating for the family, it's frustrating for the authorities, and it's just frustrating for the community in itself because this case is just gone cold and it's just been sitting there, and there's just one person out there in the world who knows what happened to this little girl and just refuses to tell it. So there was then a call about a tip, this was a couple years ago, saying that there was a man who had tried to abduct a young girl from the local area where Teekah had been abducted from, but nothing ever came from this. Teekah's mother believes that the little girl is still alive out there and that she is being raised by whomever took her as their own child. To this day, unfortunately, Teekah Lewis has never been found, and there is no further clues or evidence as to who this guy who took her might be. The case of 2-year-old Teekah Lewis, it's just frustrating and mind-boggling, and I feel like there is someone out there who knows who did this, whether they're still alive or not. It's okay to come forward with the information. Just get it off your chest. You're probably going to be in more trouble the more as time goes by than you would be to just come out and say it. It's important to the family, and it's important for Teekah, for this person to come forward with the information. I mean, somebody has to know this guy. Family members, friends, acquaintances, bosses, just someone has to know him. But the problem is that, like I said, there was no cameras working. They didn't get a license plate. There wasn't brown hair and brown eyes. There's so many Caucasian males out there who are 6 feet tall with brown hair and brown eyes. It's just very common. But, somebody had to have been there at the bowling alley to have seen this guy, maybe, picked up on his name, the type of license plate number, just something out there that could help this case finally, be solved. And like I said, I would love to know what you guys think about this case. Do you guys think it will be solved? Do you guys think that this person will eventually be identified? Or do you think it will remain a cold case for a very long time? Do you guys think it was a sex offender pedophile who may have taken her? Or do you think it was a family member? Or do you think that something else may have happened? Let me know your thoughts and opinions down below in the comment section, along with any type of case suggestions that you may have for me. And I will see you guys in my video next Tuesday. Peace out.